Hi all, I'm Jack from Quilting Dreams. Today I'm really excited because we're going to have a look at the quilt in the Liberty box from the Fat Quarter shop. I'm very excited to do this one. I love receiving these boxes and it's just a delight to be able to have a look at it and challenge myself and maybe look at an alternative way of presenting the same quilt. So with the Liberty box, it's the Sparkles Quilt Pattern. I'm just going to pop a photo of the Sparkles Quilt Pattern up so you can have a look at it. And what I've done is I've done a little bit of a twist, which has incorporated an 8-point star and an extra strip in the stripes. So we're going to have a look at that, and I've just popped a photo of that up there as well, I hope. So we're going to have a look at that today. I'm really excited about doing this. I love these quilt patterns. I think they're absolutely beautiful. So we're going to use the Old Glory fabric that came in the box. I will have some of the extra fabric in a moment and we'll go through that, what you'll need. But I'm super excited to be able to do this tutorial with you. Now look, this pattern is not my pattern. It is one from the Fat Quarter shop. So if you've got the box, you'll know exactly what the steps that I'm going through. And you'll be able to create this with me. I'd love it if we can all create it together. So let's get started. Okay, so what will we need for this quilt? So we're going to need an assortment of rulers. If you've only got a few, that's okay. But if you've got some more, you might need some smaller ones as well as some larger ones when we're cutting up that fabric. You'll definitely need your rotary cutter to cut the fabric and to cut the excess off those stars that we're going to do, as well as some pins. And my favorite, the Frixion Pen. I love using the Frixion Pen to be able to mark up the fabric and watch it iron away. I think it's quite cute actually. So that's some of the tools that you're going to need for this particular quilt. Then in terms of the fabric, we'll just pop those aside for now. In terms of fabric, we're going to use the fabric that came with the pack. So this is the Old Glory fabric by Lella Boutique. If you've seen some of my other videos, I've used Lella Boutique's fabric Old Glory in another quilt that I've done. I do love her fabric. It is just beautiful. So we're going to have a look at that. So let's just open it up and just pop those to the side. And these are the fabrics that we're going to work with in this quilt. I love these red fabrics, they're just lovely. And then we've got a couple of blue fabrics here. And I think the balance is going to look quite cute in this quilt. And then we have the panel piece there. So I think that's super excited, and I think it's a lovely range of fabric to use for this quilt. Now, in addition to that, I'm thinking of using the blue here for the top and bottom of the panel, and then I'm thinking of using the red for the border. But when we get closer to the end, we'll revisit that, and it may be that we use that blue. I'm also going to use the Bella Solid. So this one is M990098. I love this white Bella Solid, so it's one that I tend to turn to quite a bit, and so I think that'll look quite cute in this quilt as well. So we are going to be looking at this one here. So we're going to go through the steps of squaring up the panel. We're going to create each of the 8-point stars, and then each of these stripes we're going to create. You'll notice here that we've turned the stripes, so we'll still create the stripes, and then we're just turning every second one so that we get a little bit more dimension. And then we've just got these extra ones out in that external border. This is the part that I'm not sure on, so we may use blue here, or we may use red, but we'll wait and see what that looks like as we get closer to the end, because we can change our mind. We're quilters, we're allowed to change our mind. So I'm going to go ahead and cut all this fabric up, and I'm going to come back to you to square up this panel and create the 2 blocks before we assemble it together. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is square up this panel. Now, squaring up panels can be a bit tricky. If I have a look at this particular panel, at the top here, I have 1 inch of the blue fabric, of the blue, and then at the bottom it's 1.5 inches. So down here is much wider than what it is up here. So I am aiming not to have any of that in my block. So what I've had to do in order to mitigate that is I've had to about just over, or let's say just over 1/4 inch, I've had to put, it's not quite equal, so I've got 1/4 inch down here, and then I'm just going to fold that back, and then I've got this so that it is folded once and then folded twice. So let's go ahead and we're going to line this up. So I'm using the board to help me line this up, and just making sure that's perfect. Then using your long ruler and getting that on perfectly. So you'll see that I'm only just at this top end, I'm only just going to make it, and I'm going to actually maybe get a tiny bit of that blue border in there. I'm okay with that. I just didn't want I didn't want a big piece in there. So then we're just going to take that off. So you can see we've mainly taken off the blue border and a tiny bit here, but that's because the blue border is different lengths at different parts. So now we're just going to turn this around, and we're going to line this one up. We'll line that one up there, just as we have the last one. It's still keeping it in 4s. I think it's much easier to do it that way. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and trim this up now. Sorry, I did want to check that, because with this particular one, if I don't cut it correctly, then I'll have to rework all of my stars and everything around the outside. So I did, you know that saying, we want to measure twice and cut once. So with that in mind, we're going to trim this one down. And you'll have a reasonable amount here to discard off there. So there's a bit there that you're going to discard. So that's in alignment with what the pattern says in the Liberty box. So this should be, now we'll have a square panel, and that should look something like this. And I think that looks quite sweet, and it's quite good. There's a tiny little bit here of the blue, but because that's in the in the 1/4 inch, so that will just go into the seam, so there's no problems with that. So that's the way that I've looked at how to square up the panel. There's probably a lot of other ways you can do that, but this is the way that I know. So the next step that we're going to do is add the top and bottom border. So that's our next step. So we're going to get ready for that one now. Okay, so what we want to do now is we want to attach these 2 borders to our panel, to the top and bottom of our panel. So the way that we do that is we grab our panel, and we've got our borders, and we'll just take that top part of the panel first, and we'll just lay that out. Then I'll do right sides together, and we're going to pop from end to end on here. Now, what I generally like to do is make sure I'm squaring up to the side, and then we pop a pin in that end, and we square up to the other side and pop a pin in that end. So we should have a pin in both ends now. Then what I do is I like to just gently keep that nice and taut, and then find that middle piece, and we pop a pin in that middle piece. Now what you'll notice with how I do it is I'll always pin back from the edge, because I'm going to sew down that seam with a 1/4 inch foot, like a 1/4 inch seam, and I'll always sew back. But I'll never, certainly with borders like this, I certainly wouldn't be thinking about just freehand and not pinning those borders. You certainly can, but you might find you have a gap at the end, and if they're cut to the right lengths, then that gap is somewhere in the rest of this quilt, and that certainly can cause you some grief when you go to start long arm quilting it, or quilting it on your domestic machine, because you'll have essentially a little bit of gaping there. So I'm going to go ahead and pin the other one on, and then we're going to stitch this line up. I'm then just going to iron to one side, and we're going to come back and put that first inner border on. Okay, so today I'm using my JUKI. My JUKI is the TL2010Q. I have that on a stitch length of about 1.3. I'm using the scant 1/4 inch. I find that works a lot better for me. I do have the 1/4 inch foot here, but it's not one that I use very often anymore. I tend to like to use this scant 1/4 inch, and the reason for that is that I like to trim down, and I find with the 1/4 inch foot on the JUKI, it probably comes up a little bit short for me. So I've turned to using this scant 1/4 inch. I'm using a Rassant thread, and let's go ahead and sew these two ends up. Okay, so we've now got both our borders on, so one at the top and one at the bottom. So the next step is to put the next set of borders on. So what we're going to do first is we're going to pop this side border on first, and this is going to be a little bit out of the frame, so I apologise for that. I've gone ahead and pre-cut the borders. So with the way that they've asked you to do it is to cut 3 strips, and then sew those together and then sub-cut down to the length. So I've just gone ahead and done that. So the same as what we did with our top and bottom border is I like to make sure I've got this at a right angle there, and then pop that pin in. Go ahead and do that again on the other end. Make sure we've got a nice right angle there, and that is sitting there beautifully, and then pop a pin in that end. Then but then just have that out nicely there, and both ways beautifully. And then we're just going to pop a pin in the middle. So popping a pin in the middle gives us an idea of where our middle point is, and then we can go ahead and pop a couple of extra pins in, just so that we know when we're traveling down it doesn't all gape or become a little bit hard to manage, because this is starting to get to be a little bit longer. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to pop a couple of extra pins in here just to make it easier for when we're sewing. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put all 4 borders on. So we're going to stitch a 1/4 inch from that seam, from that edge there. We're going to stitch a 1/4 inch, and I'm going to put both the side borders on and then the top and bottom border on, and then I'll pop back. Okay, so we're about to start block 1 of our twist. So the twist for the Sweet Land of Liberty is just in that next set of that next border and the blocks that we're creating in that border. So on the Sparkles quilt, if you have a look here, they've just got the 3 strips, whereas I've added in an extra one, and I'm using all 3 fabrics in each strip. And then when I'm putting them together, I'm rotating them so that the lines, this fabric here is at the top in one and at the bottom in the other. So I'm just rotating them as we're piecing it together, but you could put it all the same way if you wanted to. So this is our first block that we're going to create that's just a little bit different to what's in that Sparkles quilt pattern. And in order to do that, what you'll need is 5, so you'll still need the same strips and the same number of strips, but you'll need to do your cutting differently. The width is exactly the same, but what we'll need is 2 of the background at 1 3/4, then you'll need 2 of the red at 1 3/4, and then the middle one, whatever one you choose to put in the middle, is 1 1/2. So the way we're going to do this is we're just going to strip piece these now. So what this will do is create 3 blocks for us when we sew this all together. Now this is the way we're going to do it. Now I'm not going to pin this because there is a little bit of give at each, like when we cut it down. So even if I don't sew beautifully, I know that I'll still get my 3 blocks out of this, and it's not going to be enough for there to be any problems. So I'm just going to go right sides together, and then I'm just going to stitch 1/4 inch off that edge, and I'm going to do that to all of them, and then I'll come back. Okay, so you should have your strips looking something that's a little bit like this, and as you can see, and this is the perfect example, where you're not pinning, you will be out slightly on ends, and the longer that is, the more probably that you'll be out. So what you do need to do is make sure that when you are putting borders on, that you do pin those borders and not just free stitch with them, because you will definitely not, I think I can guarantee that it'll be very hard to match them all up at both ends. So what we need to do now is subcut these down. Now, again, this isn't my pattern, so I can't tell you what this is, but definitely go to your sew sampler, because this block works out to be exactly the same size as what is in the sew sampler pattern. So if we just go ahead, we'll just take off that little bit of excess there. Just turn that around, pop that on, and then I'm just going to go ahead, and we will want to get 3 blocks out of this. Okay. And as you can see, we've got a little bit left over. So that's why I said you don't need to worry too much about pinning with this one, because you do have, and it doesn't have to be exact, but you can certainly pin and you will have it exact, and you'll have a little bit left over, which is absolutely no worries at all. So that should create 3 blocks there. And so they are now ready to go with our other blocks so that we can create, so that they can go into our next border for our quilt. So we're going to move on now to the block number 2, and I'm just going to pop these aside and get ready for block number 2. Block number 2, we are going to create the 8-point star. Now I know this one has quite a number of different names. I guess I'm just accustomed to it being the 8-point star. Now I haven't stitched every single one of them perfectly, and I'm okay with that. What the method that I'm going to show you is a method that I found that is quite easy. I have tried a few different ways of sewing these 8-point stars. So I've used the paper to do the flying geese. I've used the method where we cut up all these strips and then join them on to create the flying geese. But the method that I'm going to show you today is one that you may well be very familiar with, or it might be new to you. So what we're going to do is pop those aside, and we're just going to look at the fabric that we'll need to be able to create this 8-point star. So you'll need one of the white pieces, one white piece at 4.5 by 4.5. You'll need 4 2-inch squares. You'll need one 3.5 by 3.5 square, and that's for the center of our star. And then you'll need 4 2.5-inch squares. So what we're going to do first is we're going to mark up the back of these squares here. So how we go about doing that, and I'm just looking around for my ruler, the little one that I like to use for this, and of course when you want that, it's not where you thought you put it. That's definitely, oh, here we go, found it. All right, so using a ruler, we're going to go from corner to corner, pop the ruler corner to corner and mark that up. And we're going to do that on all 4 of our 2.5-inch squares. And I found that this is also in a way that you can save on fabric, and you don't have lots and lots of little pieces. In fact, you won't have any little pieces except to trim it down at the end, which is also really, really good, right? Unless you're looking at making a quilt with all those little leftover pieces, this is definitely another way of you to think about doing it. So we're just going to pop these 2 across here for now, and we're just going to take our white piece, which is what we're using for the outside of the borders, and we're going to place 2 of our squares right sides together, and then we're going to place them on our white piece, 1 in both corners. They will overlap, and that's exactly what you want. Now we've got our line down the middle. We're going to sew 1/4 inch either side of that line. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, and I'm going to come back to you when that's complete. Okay, so what we will have here, and it's a little bit hard to see, but we will have stitched down each side, and we've still got our marked line. What we want to do now is trim down that marked line. So we're just going to grab a ruler here and place that onto our fabric from corner to corner, grabbing our rotary cutter and trimming straight down. And that's what we're going to have it. This is what it will look like at this point. So I'm going to go ahead now, and I'm going to iron this. Now I'm going to iron it with the seams going in one direction, and I'm going to iron that so that it's going to the darker side of the fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, and I'm going to come back and we're going to show you the next step. Okay, so at this stage you should have 2 sub blocks here that look exactly like this. So the next step for us is to grab those last 2 pieces that we've got here, and we are going to again place them right sides together and down in that bottom corner, and that's going to overlap at the top, and that's perfectly fine. That's exactly what we want, and we're going to do the same thing on this one here, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to stitch again, 1/4 of an inch either side of this marked line. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Okay, so after you've stitched that up, this is what it should look like. You will have, you've got your mark line here, and it's very hard to see, but there's a stitch line 1/4 of an inch either side of that marked line. So what we're going to do now is take our ruler again, and on our marked line, we are going to trim from corner to corner and pop that aside. And we're going to do the same with this one here. The wonderful thing about this particular method, and I don't know whose method it is, so I'm sorry, I can't share that with you, but this is one that I've seen, and I thought that it was a great way to ensure we maximize the use of our fabric. And with this one here, I needed to do that as well so that I could get all the cuts out that we need. You can certainly go ahead and use this method, and you will have a tiny bit of fabric left over, but you will absolutely get everything cut out of this fabric, as I have today. I'm going to go ahead now and iron these last pieces open here, and you can see there we've got our lovely flying geese, and we're going to come back and trim that down in just a moment. Okay, so we have all of our flying geese made. So as you can see, we have no discarded fabric. We've used all of our fabric, and now we're just going to trim these down to the size that we want. So what we want to do with these is we want to trim them down to 3.5 by 2 inches. So using this ruler on these wonderful Creative Grids rulers, there's lovely lines on here. So using these lines, we want to match this point here. Like this point here, we want to match that with this point here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to pop my ruler on top, and I've got both the 45s in line with our 45s, and I've got that point in the top. So I know that that's a lovely 1/4 inch there, and we're just going to take away what is excess. I'm then going to line that up with our 2-inch line as we have here, and we're going to remove anything that's excess there. We're now then going to go to the sides. Now using our ruler again, we can use the 45° on the ruler and lining that up with our 3.5 on this side. We then want to just trim off any excess fabric that we have on that side. We're going to then turn it around and do exactly the same thing on the other side. So lining up with that 3.5 inch and keeping that 45 there, and just trimming down what we don't need. And then that's a perfect flying geese size for us. So we've got to trim down a tiny little bit, but that actually gives us the perfect size that we need to be able to create our block. I'm going to go ahead and trim up the remaining 3 blocks, and then I'll come back to you. Okay, so we have our 4 flying geese all trimmed down, and so that's looking wonderful. And what I like about this is they're not short. They just turn out just beautifully. We get that perfect 1/4 inch here, so that when we're sewing it together, it makes it just a little bit easier. Now we're going to grab our center square, and we're going to put right sides together, and we're going to make sure that's squared up with the side of the block as well. And then I'm just going to grab a quick pin and pop that in that end, and pop one in the other end. Maybe I'll just shift those to the side there. And I'm going to do the same with the other side. We're just going to pop that in so we know it's right sides together. That way we know it's going to sew beautifully and straight. You don't have to put pins in if you don't want to. You can certainly go without them. That's not a problem at all. but this is just a way that I know that it's going to stay nice and square. Now then, we've got our extra 2 pieces here, and we're going to grab these 2-inch squares, and we're going to square those up with the flying geese, and I'm just going to pop a pin in there just to keep it nice and stable. And I'm going to do the same on the other side and for the other block, and once I've done that, I will meet you over at the sewing machine to sew these up. Okay, so at this point you should have 3 rows ready to go. So we've got the center and then the top and bottom. So what we're going to now is assemble this block together. So by placing the right sides together, now I have ironed the middle in and the top and bottom out. So in doing that, what that allows me to do then is nest these seams, so you can feel that lovely connection there, and pop a pin in that one. Now I'd like to make sure I have this edge at a right angle, so I'm just going to pop a pin in there as well, and we'll just do the same here. And once we've finished pinning these together, we'll just go to the sewing machine, and we are going to stitch 1/4 inch from that edge on both sides, and that will actually create our second block. So I put all these blocks together. It took me about 3.5 hours to sew all the blocks together. So it may, you know, I didn't do the pinwheel, so I don't know how long they took to do. But in terms of these blocks, I think you need to allow yourself, look, maybe 3.5–4 hours, depending on, you know, how quickly you go, and depending on, you know, how fast your machine is, you know, and let's be honest, how many breaks we have as well. There's certainly something that we need to do while we're doing this as well. So we've got that all pinned up. I'm going to stitch down here, and then I'm going to iron that to one side. So I'll pop back as soon as that is complete. Okay, and this is what my block looks like at this point. So the last step we want to do to these blocks before we start assembling them all together is we want to trim this down. We want to make sure that that's 6.5 by 6.5. So I'm just going to go ahead now. I've got a 6.5 by 6.5 ruler, and I'm just going to square that up with my block, and I'm using the star and the lines on my ruler to mark that up. So I'm having this one here is going straight through the middle, and then I've got the same in the other direction, and then I'm just lining that up. Now this one here, this block is pretty much spot on. There is not much that I'm going to be able to trim off this block, so just double checking, and then we're just going to trim around. And as you can see, there is not much coming off this block, and I'm just going to do this. Just be careful if you do it that way. And you can see there was just a tiny little bit there, but using this method means that you've got very little waste. Yes, we trim down in a couple of spots, and we make sure these are beautiful and accurate. And look at how this has turned out with our 1/4 inches here. at each point. So that means that when we start sewing it all together, this is just going to turn out beautifully. So for us, our next step is starting to put our borders together. So the way we're going to do that is we need to put one of the stripe borders right next to the 8-point star. Now I'm actually doing my borders so that I have the borders, these stripes going in opposite directions for each one. And then if I just pop that across there, hopefully you can still see. Here's the other one that we're using, and I'm going to alternate the two different colors. So we're going to rotate our stripe blocks, and we're going to alternate the two colors for our star blocks. I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to put those borders together and come back to you. Just remember, when you're popping them together, right sides together, I would highly recommend you popping a pin in each end so that you make sure that those blocks are nice and square, because if not, you could end up with quite a it might have a little wave in it, and we don't want a little wave in it at this stage. So let's trim those up and make sure we have them nice, not trim them up, let's make sure we square them up and have them so that when we finish the strips, that we have them looking nice. So these blocks are the same size as what's in the Sew Sampler pattern, so you can go ahead and follow the Sew Sampler pattern in terms of how many blocks you need to stitch together to create this border. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, and I'm going to come back to you once I have the 4 strips ready to go. Okay, so we've now finished all of these borders and they have come together really well. So I'm really happy with how that is. So if we take the time to square up our blocks, it really does result in quite a lovely outcome. I have just going to insert a photo of all the 4 strips that have now been completed. So I'll just pop that up for you to have a look at. And I've followed the pattern that I showed you at the start in terms of how how each block was laid out, and I've just followed that exactly to the T. So the next step that we want to do is we want to put that border, this border, onto the panel. So what we're going to do, and I know it's really hard because the board is not quite big enough, but we're going to again go right sides together, and we're going to, this is the edge here, we're going to make sure that the right angle and the edge is all matched up beautifully, and we'll pop a pin in that end. We're going to do the same on the other end. This is the other end here, putting making sure we've got that nice along that right angle there, and I'll iron that again a bit later because it looks like it needs another good iron there. Okay, so we've got one on each end. Now we're just going to bring that so that it's straight there. And what you'll notice is that it's just lovely. Actually, this one's worked out really well. I don't have to do anything. So, you know, definitely squaring up those blocks makes a big difference. And we're just going to pop a pin somewhat in the middle, and then between this middle and the end, I just make sure that's nice and snug, and we pop another pin in here. Now you can go ahead and pop another one in. You can pop in as many as you like, however many it is to that makes it easier for you to sew down that edge. So once I've done that end, just bring this other end in here and we'll do the same thing. So just making sure that that's nice, those edges together, and popping some pins in there, and then I do the same thing when I do the next one. So what we'll have now is a border on nice and neat. So our border is on. We're going to go ahead now and we will sew this one in. Then I'm going to add the other 3 borders, and I'm going to come back to you as soon as that's all complete, because then we've got our final border to put on after that. So we're certainly pulling this together really quickly. It's such a beautiful, I just love it. I love Lella Boutique. This is my second quilt that I've made with Lella Boutique fabric. She's just such a beautiful designer. So let's go ahead and let's sew this one up as well. Okay, so we have now finished placing on that border. I'm just going to insert a photo here because it's quite large at this point of what that quilt is starting to look like. I really love it. I love red, white and blue. I think they're amazing colours in a quilt together, and I have never created a quilt with a panel before, so there's been a lot of new, firsts for me, and I am absolutely loving this. So now what we want to do is put our corners into the border. So I've gone ahead and I've cut the top and the bottom border strip, and I'm just going to pop these out, this one out. And what we want to do, if this is the bottom one, I want to go ahead and place this this star in the bottom, and that's right sides together, and we're just going to pop some pins in here to keep that right angle perfect, because I think if you followed my method with the piecing of the last border, you would find that it's really turned out quite well. I just was so impressed with how well it turned out. So I hope you are as well, because sometimes it can be a bit tricky with some of our borders, but that's okay. So that's the top one in, and on the other side of the top one, we want one of our stripe blocks, and we're just going to line that one up as well. Okay, so that's our borders both with the corner blocks on. So that's the top border that we've done there, and we've now got them ready to go. So I'm just going to place them aside for now, and we're going to grab the panel back again. And here's our panel. Oops, sorry about that. With our beautiful border with the stars and stripes. I think that looks really, really lovely. And we're going to put on our side border first. This is an amazingly awesome quilt to practice your borders. If you have problems with borders, then this is the perfect quilt to practice that, because there are lots of borders in this quilt. So again, let's just go through that process again of making sure we've got that lovely right angle there, popping a pin in the end here and securing that in, and then going down to the other end with that 90-degree angle and securing down that end. And then we're just going to stretch this out, and I know you can't see from end to end. Eventually I'll get a wide angled lens, but for now I don't have one. So we're going to just stretch that out nicely, and then we'll bring that in and find that middle part there and pop a pin in there. Then of this section here, we just want to straighten this up. Once they get a bit bigger, there's a little bit more to work with, so it can be a bit challenging on a table like this. This is a big table, but I've just got it into 4 different work areas, so it's a little bit different. And then this last one here, we just make sure that's nice. We don't want to pull the fabric, but we do want to make sure that it's sitting just nice. So we do want to give it a little, well, you know, just a bit of tension on it. So that's our first border on. We're going to go ahead and I'm going to stitch all 4 borders on now, and I'm going to come back to you as soon as those borders are on, then we can have a look at what the finished quilt looks like. I am starting to think though that maybe I want to put another border around the outside, a red one, but let's pop these on first, and let's see where my thinking goes. Okay, so that is the borders on, and that now aligns to the quilt pattern, Sparkles Quilt Pattern. If you have put in the corner blocks like I have, you'll need to make sure that your width of fabric is 6.5 inches wide by length, you know, top and bottom sides. I actually think it looks really, really cute, but what I wanted to do is just trial adding an additional border. So the border that we've put at the top and bottom of the panel, I'm going to go ahead and add a 2.5 inch border all the way around the quilt. I think it might just help to tie it in before I put a red binding on it. But, you know, let's see how it goes. So I'm going to go ahead now and pop those in. And I'll come back to you as soon as that's finished. Okay, so I'm just going to insert a photo of the quilt with the extra border on it. That extra border, I actually think it pulls it all together. If you have got a little bit of extra fabric, it's definitely worthwhile considering to pop that border on, because then the binding's going to be red, and I think that will pull it all together just nicely. Now, just one thing to note is that the panel is a slight off-white, and I've used a white. I didn't have any of my Bella 200 available, so I've used a slight off-white, like a more of a white, which I still think looks absolutely beautiful, and I'm really happy with it. The next step for us is that we need to quilt this beautiful top. Now, one thing for us to note if we're going to quilt this ourselves or we're going to send this to a long arm quilter, is that we want to have a look at the back. And when we're looking at the back, what we want to do is look at these red threads. So you'll see here there's a number of red threads, and you want to go ahead and you want to trim those red threads. And the reason we want to trim those red threads and remove them is that when we start quilting, you'll see them through
the quilt top, and because we are going up against this beautiful white. So what I would recommend is firstly going across the quilt, looking for these red threads and just snipping them off, and then just snipping them off and getting rid of them, and then go ahead and iron your quilt. Make sure it's nicely squared up for your long arm quilter, because it does make it a much easier job for them to do the quilting. If you're doing it at home, again, it's the same principles. If you have it nice and square, then you'll have no problems. If you follow the binding, the border method that I have shared with you today, then you will have perfect borders like this, and you'll have that perfect right angle. The ones where this might not occur is if you haven't pinned it on end to end, middle, and then sub across the way, then you may have it going short or longer. You want to make sure you square that up to that perfect right angle, and then that makes it much easier for your long arm quilter. It'll also make it less wavy, so that when the quilt goes on, a quilt that is less wavy will have a much better result. A quilt that has a lot of waves in it will just, it just means that there's additional work that your long arm quilter or yourself on your own machine will need to do to make sure that you can get everything quilted just beautifully. I'm going to go ahead now, trim up all my loose red threads, and then pop it onto the quilting machine and come back to you as soon as that is complete.
Okay, and just like that, we have finished today's quilt, which is the Sparkles Quilt Pattern from the Fat Quarter shop, as part of the Liberty box that was sent out just recently. I've really enjoyed making this quilt, and I really do hope that you did as well. I enjoyed making the alternative blocks. It certainly gave it something different, and it gives you options when you're putting your quilt together. If you've enjoyed today's session, then please select the like button. If you'd like to see more of my creative content, if you could subscribe, that would certainly help me out. I tend to like to get the sew sampler boxes or any of the boxes from the Fat Quarter shop and put on my own spin to it so that it gives you an alternative to think about. I thoroughly enjoy doing them, and I do hope that you enjoy it as well. Until next time, keep crafting and have a wonderful day. Bye!